Cheese here. How are you all? Nice afternoon. It's a bit cloudy, but it's pleasant. So I was asked to do a video here. I should ask to do two videos. I'm going to do the first one here. And it is on the subject of what has become known as Rapid Onset Gender Dysphoria. Now, let's give you a little bit of background to that. Gender dysphoria, as you know, is a sense of discomfort or ill-at-easeness with what has become known as one's assigned birth gender. For many years, the two standard forms of gender dysphoria were well understood since about the mid-1980s anyway. The first type had been understood for much longer than that. That was homosexual gender dysphoria, in which the individual is feminized across a whole range of parameters, and particularly noticeably in sexuality. These would be, if they're male, they would be very, very strongly attracted to men, and always very conventional masculine men. And if they're female, they would be attracted to females, to women, and always again they'd be attracted to very conventional feminine women. And at the same time, the first lot of males would present in a very feminized manner, whereas the second lot would tend to present in a very masculinized manner. And that was understood, well understood, from before 1920, really before the end of the 19th century. Now, the other type, which appeared in males, was really not understood because these were heterosexual. These males were only interested in men themselves if they were in role. Normally, they were heterosexual, they were attracted to women. Ray Blanchard, as you may well know if you've followed this channel, during the 1980s and 90s produced a series of papers that managed to successfully define what was going on with these people, and he gave it a name. It's called Autogynephilia, love of the self as a woman. Essentially, autogynephilia is a man's propensity to be sexually aroused by the thought or image of himself as a woman. That has never been successfully challenged. That is the state of the science as we know it today. Now, this had become the basis, this dichotomy, which is sometimes called the Blanchard typology, although Blanchard didn't really develop the homosexual dysphoria bit of it. It's become known as the Blanchard typology, had become the basis on which gender dysphoric treatments were applied across the planet. However, in the early part of the last decade, that's the 2010s, it became obvious that there were a large number of females coming forward complaining of gender dysphoria. Now, previous to this, very few females had had gender dysphoria, and those that there were almost exclusively HSTS. That was, they had homosexual gender dysphoria. They were attracted to women, and they were basically guys born female who were attracted conventionally to conventional women. And not very difficult to understand, fairly easy to deal with. In 2018, a research team led by Lippman decided to look at the statistics. To give you an example, the Portland and Tavistock, which is the UK's only gender clinic, had reported that its referrals had gone through the roof by thousands of %. But what had also happened was that the balance had changed. That overwhelmingly now, they were seeing young females coming forward claiming gender dysphoria. And that was what led to this notion of ROGD. You could see was that people were claiming to have females were claiming to have gender dysphoria, but it had come on very, very quickly. They would go to university or college and come home for the first break, Thanksgiving for the Americans, perhaps Christmas for the British, and suddenly they were like, I'm trans, Mum. I'm really a guy. And of course parents were going nuts. Lippman et al. Described this, and he gave it this term, rapid onset gender dysphoria, because it appeared very quickly. I think that was a terrible, terrible mistake. I don't think that they should have done that. I think the research was fine. I think that the conclusions they came to regarding the numbers were fine. But I think the fact is that this is not gender dysphoria. Conventional gender dysphorias both have, actually 4 types, but never mind. We'll keep them at homosexual and non-homosexual. Both non-homosexual and homosexual gender dysphorias have a massive sexual component. Obviously, homosexual gender dysphoria has a huge sexual component, but so does the non-homosexual form. It's more complex, but it's still there. And by the way, you'll hear a lot, particularly from organisation troublemakers like GLAAD and various others, saying that, oh, gender isn't related to sexuality. That's complete and utter nonsense. Conventionally speaking, gender and sexuality are related such that gender expresses your sexuality. Okay? Your gender is governed by your sexuality. Now, ROGD particularly didn't seem to come under this aegis, and nevertheless, it was classified by Lippmann as a gender dysphoria. Now, I think that was a mistake. And the reason I think it was a mistake is that the classification as gender dysphoria has allowed treatment to go ahead, which is similar in nature to the kind of treatment that would happen in genuine gender dysphoria, right? Now, one of the things we're finding about ROGD, and it's becoming increasingly obvious, or so-called ROGD, is that, in fact, it sets off just as quickly as it sets on. So you can have a situation where someone appears at a clinic and says, oh, I've got, I'm really a person born female. I'm really a guy doctor, I need to be changed. And because it has been classified as gender dysphoria, they get the full range of treatments which would be given to a genuinely dysphoric person, which might include really severe hormonal therapies and surgeries. Now, just before we go any further, let's be quite clear. Testosterone for females is basically a poison, right? It's massively effective in masculinizing females. As Dr. Ehrensaft says, you can basically take a female of any age, give her testosterone, and she'll turn into a guy very quickly. She might be a little bit small-boned, she might be a little bit more petite than the average for men, but she'll grow the beard, she'll deepen the voice, she'll get the musculature. It's not a problem. Testosterone is a really strong hormone, right? Which estrogen just isn't. When you give girls HRT to turn them, from girls to a male presentation, to transition them, you don't need to block the estrogen. You just give them testosterone, and that wipes it out. For boys, it's totally different because estrogen isn't a very strong hormone. So there you have to block the testosterone first. You say, no, you stop that working, and then you give them estrogen to cause the feminization. The point here is that testosterone, when it's given, is extremely strong, and it will cause irreversible changes to the body. And I'm not even talking about surgery here. The idea of permanent sterility seems less proven than people thought. There are certainly many cases now of people who've been through masculinizing HRT who still have been able to get pregnant. So, but nevertheless, they will have permanent beard growth, permanent body hair growth, and many of the things which will become very undesirable to them, if they desist, will be permanent. They can't be taken back. It gets even worse if you're on the surgery express train, and unfortunately there are some clinics, not so much in the UK, but apparently in the USA this still happens, where it's like, well, first we get you on testosterone, we'll schedule you for your surgeries, and they will have double mastectomies, hysterectomy, and so on, in very short order. And these women are left with their bodies completely ruined, destroyed. And it's not because transsexualism doesn't exist. Transsexualism absolutely does exist. It's not because gender dysphoria doesn't exist. Gender dysphoria definitely does exist. It's happening because what these people have is being diagnosed as a gender dysphoria when it isn't. It's something else completely. It's not gender dysphoria. It's another form. It is in fact a form of psychosis. And this psychosis is sometimes called mass psychogenic illness, mass psychogenic disorder, and there are a few others. Epidemic hysteria, there's another one, or mass hysteria. And this has been going on for many, many years. Now, what you have to understand, it's been reported for many, many years, over 100 years. For example, in Indonesia, there was quite recently a mass outbreak of screaming fits, where girls in classes just start to scream, and nothing anyone could do would stop them, and many of them ended up being hospitalized. Think about that. They're hospitalized because they couldn't stop screaming. Right? Now, the only solution that has been put up for this is mass psychogenic illness or disorder. Why would that be the case? Well, the first thing to look at is the other things that affect teenage girls. And we know that teenage girls are particularly prone to psychological problems around and just after puberty. When their self-confidence can be very low, especially in a society which so vaunts feminine beauty. You know, if girls don't think they can cut the mustard, they can become quite disturbed. And so we have things like anorexia, where people get deep eating disorders because they think the ideal girl is much thinner than they are. Now, the fact is, most women are fairly pear-shaped, to be honest with you, and that's what women look like, you know. There's no point in trying to look like a stick insect if that's your shape, you know. But girls can become very disturbed about things like this. Bulimia, which is where variant of anorexia, we provoke vomiting to get rid of food, and girls can become really obsessed with this. Self-harm, cutting. There's a whole range of disorders that we know of that affect girls in this area, and I think that we should add what has been called ROGD into this. It's not gender dysphoria. It's another form of teenage disorder, particular to young girls, to teenage, post-pubescent, adolescent girls. Now, why is it happening? What's causing this? Well, if we look at the other disorders that we've talked about, things like anorexia, bulimia, self-harm, repeated suicidality, you know, these sort of things, which are very common in this age range amongst girls, then what we find is that they tend to have a social aspect. They tend to be provoked by something that's going on either in the culture or in the peer group in which the individual exists. And I think that is exactly what's happening here with this, what has been called rapid onset gender dysphoria, but it's not gender dysphoria at all. What's happening here is the culmination of the indoctrination of a certain viewpoint, a very dangerous viewpoint, which is causing real harm now. And that viewpoint has been proposed basically by feminists and postmodernists. The central core of this idea is that there is no difference between men and women. They're the same. That all of the differences that exist between men and women are caused by so-called socialization. These people are called social constructivists. They're wrong. There are thousands of papers now which show, definitively, conclusively show, that men and women are different. There is such a thing as a lady brain, and there is such a thing as a guy brain. We are not the same. And the differences between us are not socially conditioned. They're not due to socialization. They're innate, right? But the idea that there are no differences, that gender itself is simply a social construct, is being pumped into today's children, particularly females, by feminists and postmodernist educators. Now, to just explain that, you have to understand that in the West, the education system has been completely corrupted by feminism and postmodernism. It's absolutely shocking the levels to which this has reached. It's appalling, and I'll do another video about it. And people have just let this happen because they didn't know what was happening. And what is happening now is that the most dangerous philosophies you can imagine are being taught to children who don't have the intellectual skills to fight them by committed postmodernists and feminists who do not believe the science. They refuse to believe the science. And this is a major, major problem. So they've taught a whole generation of young girls, young women, adolescent girls, that gender is something you can choose. Because if it's just a social construct, obviously you can just change it. Reconstruct yourself as a guy. Simple, isn't it? And to make it worse, I mean, that's the postmodernist point of view. To make it even worse, the feminists have come along and said, women are oppressed. Now, we're talking about Western women here. I mean, that's just an utterly ludicrous statement. You try asking an Indian woman if she thinks Western women are oppressed. It's an absurd statement. Yet they get away with stating it. And so there is a connection here. What's being said is, in the first place, that gender is just a social construct. You can change it any way you want. And secondly, you are oppressed because you're a woman. If woman is a gendered construct, then if you change into a man, all of your oppression will go away, all of your problems will go away, and you'll be a happy bear. It's actually difficult to imagine a more pernicious, vicious, and unpleasant philosophy. And the fact that this is actually being taught to young women, and it is a crime. These people are criminals. They should not be teaching. They should actually, well, I'd have them in jail. I think that teaching people this sort of thing, it's immensely evil. It's pure evil. Women are women because they're female. It's nothing to do with society. It's not to do with socialization. Gender is not about socialization, it's about sexuality. Women are not oppressed. If women were oppressed, fair enough, but they still couldn't change that because you can't change. If your gender is innate and linked to your sexuality, how are you going to change it? You're going to change your sexuality? Everybody says sexuality can't be changed. And we've been saying that for a very long time. And there's not many things that I agree with the new gay man about, but I think that on this one he's right. I think that innate sexuality just can't be changed. If you have inverted sexuality, that is, if you're a male who likes to be penetrated by men, then there's nothing you can do about it. You're going to be that way for the rest of your life. It's a little bit more vague with this so-called ROGD thing because so much of it is to do with false ideas that have been put into people's heads. But that's, this is not, like I say, this is not real gender dysphoria. This is about people being persuaded that somehow this fantasy idea of the so-called patriarchy is oppressing them. It isn't. Women are not oppressed in the West. They just aren't. They're extremely well protected, and they actually have a better situation. They're privileged over men. They are. Just look at all the court cases. Women are privileged over men. Society has taken huge steps over the last 50 to 100 years to ensure that any imbalances have been removed. We now have a situation where there are too few men at university. We need to start using the techniques that were used to increase the number of women at university to increase the number of men. We've gone past the null point. Women are now the privileged class in Western society. And yet, these so-called educators are still trying to persuade young women that they're somehow oppressed. They're not. They are not oppressed. But they've been made to believe they are by some deeply, deeply evil people who really need to be shut down and stopped. It gets worse as I mentioned earlier on, there is this thing that I call the surgery express train. And because this social disorder, this mass hysteria, is being diagnosed as a gender dysphoria, it's being treated in the way that genuine gender dysphorias are, which is give them the pills, let's schedule them for surgery. But these people don't have gender dysphoria. There's no reason why they should have their bodies cut to bits. Because the simple fact is that, like most of these disorders of adolescence, they will grow out of it. They will disappear as they reach maturity. As they end adolescence and move into adulthood, these problems will go away. Right? I mean, eating disorders are a very common thing amongst adolescent girls, but they're not really such a common thing amongst adult women. And the same is true of all of these. They tend to die down as the woman approaches maturity, and she starts to get other forms of validation, right, which support her self-identity. And that's really what's important here, is that people have confidence in their selves, and that they have the ability to live full lives as who they are. And that's really what's important here. But if you start cutting bits off them because of this false, I believe, diagnosis, then you're just asking for trouble. You're asking for hundreds of people to be coming along in 5 to 10 years, and I've been saying this, by the way, for the last 4 years, with massive lawsuits, which are going to completely disrupt the system. It's going to mean that people who genuinely do have gender dysphoria, and by the way, I personally believe that only HSTS, and I believe that only homosexual gender dysphoria, and those with non-homosexual gender dysphoria who also have what is called pseudo-bisexualism, which is actually developed to the point where they are completely androphilic amongst males, they're the only ones who are suitable for surgery. And not all of them are suitable anyway. You know, we are operating on far too many people. Most people would be better off just saying, okay, fine, perhaps have an orchiectomy to completely get rid of their testosterone. But most HSTS, that is, sexual inverts, will live quite happily like that. It's not that common for them to really need surgery. It's over-prescribed. It may not be too much of a problem in HSTS because they live like that fine. They weren't going to use their penises. Do you know what I mean? But for AGPs who might well, especially if they remain heterosexual, that is, they're attracted to women, they're going to want to use a penis. If you cut it off, you've got a problem. You've got a real problem because, you know, that male character is going to come back and say, what did you do? However, and what's going to happen is that if there's a huge reaction to the interventions that are taking place, which I believe are unnecessary, in the case of what is being called ROGD, but isn't gender dysphoria at all, then that's going to impact on the availability of proper treatment for those who actually do need it. You know, in the UK, you already have a case coming forward now, a psychiatric nurse is taking the Poaching the River to court because she doesn't believe they should be giving hormonal treatment to anyone under the age of 18. Well, the fact is that for many male to feminine transitioners, they need those blockers at the age of 13 or 14, at the latest. They need them to arrest the masculinization so that they can live their lives fully as women. So if this person is successful, then that will impact terribly on a whole raft of vulnerable people, HSTS. So if this woman is successful in this court case, and I sincerely hope she won't be, the impact will be felt by people who actually do need at least the hormonal treatment. By the way, I don't believe that anyone under the age of 18 should be having surgery. I'm absolutely against that. But there's no reason why testosterone blockers shouldn't be given to young MTF. It's completely reversible. You stop taking the blockers, you have a normal male puberty. It's just not a big deal. But what's happening now is you're seeing this reaction, and it's being fueled by the legitimate concerns about people who are being misdiagnosed as having gender dysphoria, this ROGD. It's not gender dysphoria. It's something else. It's a kind of mass hysteria, which has been caused by essentially by them being indoctrinated with what can only be described as a pack of lies. You know, gender is not a social construct. Gender is innate. You cannot change it. If you try to change it, you'll have gender dysphoria. What these girls are suffering from is not gender dysphoria. It's a kind of mass psychosis brought on by some very, very, very unpleasant people working inside the education system who really need to be grubbed out. And I mean that, absolutely, grubbed out. Thank you, that's that one. I hope that one does.